an undisclosed location in the Great Western Desert in the land of the free and autonomous Native American people. The 2024 presidential campaign in the next time to return all US land back to their rights owners. This is the Ben Zion Podcast.
Techno-communism. Welcome back to the Techno-communism show. I'm going to talk a little bit more about privatization as a far-right phenomena. We think of this kind of thing as being commonplace and accepted in the United States. That does not mean that it's good. When put this in the context of accelerating technological advancement a little bit. So I'll start off by saying that I used to be affiliated with a party called the United States Transhumanist Party. I was elected to run in their primary process as the presidential candidate for that party. There's quite a number of people who threw their hat in the ring, and by some strange alchemy, I ended up being the person that was selected. I didn't know much about them before that, and I was a little bit blissfully ignorant on other subjects, and I should have never gotten involved with these people because they are neoliberals, and they want to present themselves as different from the two neoliberal parties in the United States, but they're not. What they are doing is doing this sleight of hand where, and this is something that's done by all of Silicon Valley and all of tech people and futurists, not just transhumanists, not just the transhumanist party, but they are much worse than some. Which is, what are they doing? They're doing this trick where they're convincing people that this privatization, this concentration of wealth in the hands of a few at the expense of the stability of a civilization, at the expense of many, many lives, and a great deal of quality of life, is a good thing. And they do this with this particular, very science fiction type concept, that is that there's going to be a takeoff, a technological set of changes. The technological singularity won't require that civilization change in any way. All of these people are very conservative for the most part. The idea that they're going to change, that all the people that want to change civilization in these ways are also more conservative than the average person is itself pretty suspicious. But they're creating a narrative where these privatization maniacs and imperialists, of which they uphold those institutions, are not killing the planet, are not harming people, are not sowing destabilization across many, many continents, but they're actually going to save the planet. And that's a lie. Whether there is some kernel of truth to the ideas of emerging technology changing civilization, these capitalists are not going to be the ones to do that. So let's contextualize what privatization actually is, just a little bit here. So where did this term come from, privatization? Well, the German National Socialists, the Nazi party, were the ones to coin the term privatization. And there were an awful lot of institutions. By the 1920s and 1930s, much of the world understood the value of public goods. It's been a great force of evil to reverse that trend. Understood the value of public property and public endeavor. And the Nazis, who in early years presented themselves as a variety of socialist, as ill-conceived social chauvinist organizations, lesser virulence, almost invariably will move towards this Nazi model. But they seized in bad faith on this terms and aesthetics, like having socialist in the name, to do quite the opposite of what people fighting for a humane economic system would do, and that is, among many other things, seizing public assets and giving them to their cronies, giving them to the 1%, creating these bogus institutions of private wealth and propping them up. Does that sound familiar? Well, that's been the mandate of the two parties, the liberal left party, not not really either of those things, and the right-wing party. Both of these are neoliberal parties, and they have become overwhelmingly so in the last 4 decades. The neoliberalism of our time is not different from fascism of the early to mid 20th century. It's really not. The aesthetics are different. Some of the ways in which people are exterminated, not the extermination itself, but there's a very real sense in which all of the crimes of the West have kind of been pawned off on people like Hitler and Mussolini. Because Hitler and Mussolini were not the only people committing genocides in the imperial powers of the 20th century, but all of everyone else's sins have kind of been thrown on them, and so we've whitewashed everything else, and nothing really draws this into sharper focus better than the United States, history's most successful fascist country, who is responsible for the deaths of approximately 30 to 40 million people since the end of that Second World War. And almost all of those deaths were people I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, The Jakarta Method, where like people in Indonesia, 1 million Indonesian leftists were systematically targeted and murdered by the fascist U.S. and fascist Western powers. It's called the Jakarta model because this is repeated many, many times throughout the world. And somehow we've managed to allow the U.S.'s very one-sided Cold War propaganda to overwhelm this narrative of what the quote Cold War was really about, which was really just about fascists, privatization maniacs, murdering people who would have otherwise asserted their rights for public ownership of lands and institutions and entities in their own country. And you can't steal those things if people have them locked down in their country. So just murder those people. And this is happening in the many, many millions. Some of the most egregious examples and best remembered examples relative to Indonesia are places like Korea and Vietnam, and countries that were literally divided in half to prevent this from happening. All of this is the action of fascists. And all of the rhetoric about stopping communism on closer examination makes no sense because the only thing that communists were trying to do is protect ordinary people and build a humane and sustainable economic system. And the fact that was becoming more popular in the 1800s, 1900s, it was never a bad thing. But fascists were able to paint themselves as the victims in that because, heaven forbid, that the 1% loses a tiny fraction of their power over everyone else. And so great pains were taken to see that wouldn't happen. And what is the expense of that? Well, the planet's now dying. The fascists are not intelligent people. And when they're given this kind of power, they do things like create institutions of an ecocidal kind that kill the entire planet. So it not have happened had this world revolution been allowed to occur. What does that have to do with futurism? These people who are telling the story about how advancing technology and they contextualize it all in terms of capitalism, how capitalists advancing technology, which the capitalists are not bad people in this story. In reality, they are, but in their this narrative that they're creating, they're not bad people. They're people who are going to save the planet. And it's complete nonsense. It's a lot of lies, and it's what people like the Transhumanist Party represent. They're overwhelmingly neoliberals and people stupid enough to call themselves a socialist while having their arm around CIA cutout the neoliberal pieces of shit that populate that board and that party. Before I get to the Jakarta Method, I want to really give you some idea of what the problem with these people is. Overwhelmingly, these futurists are not people who support a public health service, which is the real red flag, right? They support privatized healthcare. They support a thing which should never exist, private enterprise to do with health. All of these things should be public goods. They should be publicly funded. All of these institutions should be wholly rearranged. And these people overwhelmingly are supporting things like a big pharma, a monstrosity, insurance, a horrible monstrosity, health insurance. It's not a thing that should exist. And they'll say that, oh, we don't like that, but what can we do? Well, what you can do is you can actually say the truth to people, but they don't do that. Everyone on the planet is saying, oh, what can we do? Yeah, if everyone recognizes the problem, and all it really takes is for everyone to start speaking out. So there isn't a problem. The problem is you. The problem is you pretending that you can't do anything when actually you can, and it would be a relatively simple matter for people to start to do this. A little bit about the problem. This is a story from a few years ago. This is from MIT News, not itself very fascist friendly. A new study shows rich and poor have huge mortality gap in the United States. And so, yeah, when you're looking at people engaging in this sleight of hand, talking about utopian outcomes to do with public health, bogus utopian outcomes to do with public health, like the transhumanist party, you have to look at what they really actually believe and represent, what they're really actually propping up, and you have to look at the world as it really is, and the contrasts there. So these are people who do not support a public health service, a major cause of this mortality gap. In unprecedented detail, the lifespan gap is shown to be large and growing rapidly. And this was in 2016, 7 years ago, more than 7 years ago. This research was done and released to the public. And what has happened in that time? Life expectancy has fallen off a cliff since then. Conditions relating to a pandemic, but also all of those pandemic problems are very specific to inappropriate responses to safety measures and lockdown conditions and having a public health service, any one of which a number of undertakings in support of that, a number of measures taken might have done a good deal to prevent the pandemic. China has a small number of deaths relative to its large size because they did all of those things. And did they do all of those things perfectly? No. But they have a public health service. They were willing to take those safety measures in defiance of private wealth. We didn't in January, February of 2020. We knew that this thing was about to spread around the world. And we're able to model that sort of thing, but we didn't do anything that would have stopped that, like close down the airlines, because these airlines have huge lobbies, and the lobbies more or less just control the federal government. Private wealth controls the United States federal government. So they'll kill millions and millions of people rather than just do a simple, sensible thing. And the West is responsible for this violence. There's tens and tens of millions of dead of coronavirus because the West is able to leverage influence in these areas to see that airlines are staying open and appropriate measures are not taken across the boards. And countries that have people living on a few $100s a year that have had their governments destabilized time and time again by the fascist West and the U.S. What can they do to stop that influence in these critical moments? There's very little that they can do. So the takeaway here is life expectancy in the United States artificially high, even being lower than it was, because those 30% of people, mostly European American people, who don't ever really live with the wolf at the door, have an even longer lifespan still than the working people and people of color, who are some standard deviations lower life expectancy, is the idea of this article. The richest 1% of men in the United States lives 14.6 years longer than the poorest 1% of men. That's a long time. And 10 years among women in those differences. And that has gotten worse. So when you see people saying the opposite, telling these fairy tales like the transhumanist party about how a miracle is just about to happen, and that's all going to happen through the actions of private wealth. That's not the thing that's ever happened in the past, and that's not whatever the new technology may be. The problem will be worsened by by the institutions of privatization, so to speak, that they represent. And it's not that hard to figure all this out. You can look at the 20th century in a little bit broader sense, and look at the phenomena of automation overall, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about emerging technology. We're talking about more automation in different sectors. A lot of sectors have become very highly automated or fully automated in the course of the 20th century. But what happened was new managerial methods and manners, all kinds of treachery along those lines were created, ways of further concentrating wealth in the hands of a few. So the benefit of this high degree of automation across many sectors was not felt by working people. And then because of these institutions of neoliberalism that continued, this trend of poor treatment of basically everyone, we have seen quite the opposite. Instead of longer lifespans, we have shorter lifespans. Instead of working less, despite high degree of automation, it stand to reason, the most intuitive thing there would be that a high degree of automation would lead to less work. But that's not the case. What happened was neo-colonial slave system, wage slave system effectively imposed, and perverse ideologies like neoliberalism and others used to trap people in those systems. And you won't really find futurists who are not on the wrong side of history on this kind of thing. And this could all change, I think, in the next few years, because we are entering an age of new kinds of automation, advanced algorithms becoming a good deal more sophisticated. It's just I saw a headline that says that a quantum computing paradigm could completely eclipse the digital paradigms, the existing computing infrastructure that we use today, in as little as 2 years, according to IBM, I think. These are fast machines that can do things that there's still problems with the hardware of being able to do these things, but when that's fixed, these things will be operating a lot more quickly. And you have, of course, the emergence of stronger AI in the last year or so, that tells a pretty clear story of where this is going when this becomes stronger still. This has a capacity for tremendous disruption and upheaval, has a capacity to, and mostly people are fear-mongering about this. They say that the AI itself will be out of control, and our institutions are not prepared to deal with that. But what they're really doing is whitewashing this wage slave institutions and fascist-friendly institutions, and saying that this thing that flattens the playing field and allows workers to perhaps challenge that is a threat. But that, of course, is not the threat. Just in the way that I described, the world revolution should have been allowed to happen. The planet wouldn't have been dying. We need to take that lesson and apply it to everything else. We need to be willing to fight the fight against these fascist institutions. And that's something that almost no futurist does. And that's why these people are widely despised and disregarded, because they're not even speaking a basic truth to people. And people might not be able to track or care that much every way in which these people are lying, but they know enough to know that what they're looking at is a bunch of bullshit with respect to what futurists are mostly saying. And not all of them are like this. I stick to this number of about 1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000 tech people is not an out-and-out fascist or fascist sympathizer. And I think that's a pretty good number to go by. And you say, well, I know a lot of people who are left-leaning or something in these communities, but the planet's dying. The only people that have ever prevented things like this from happening historically are revolutionary communists. Are these left-leaning people revolutionary communists? Are they upholding revolutionary communists? Are they elevating this? Are they impressed with the exigency of this problem themselves? No, they're not. They're so if anybody who's soft pedaling any of that is clearly going to be some kind of fascist sympathizer, not the left-leaning person that they present themselves as. Every fascist presents themselves. Every fascist sympathizer presents themselves as some kind of reasonable person, some kind of progressive-minded person. But you have to actually look at what they're really doing, what they really would do, and what they try to do, and understand that they might be lying, and not lying to themselves. Even. Switch to this story of the Jakarta Method now, because I'm saying this number a lot of times on this on this program. And some of the people who subscribe to the show, you're familiar with these problems. You're familiar with the sham that was the Cold War, and the tremendous amount of violence that's been done in under cover of that subterfuge. But a lot of people, I would imagine, watch this and just say, does that really happen? Men, 40 million, 30 to 40 million people being murdered, the United States being a fascist country. But luckily, there have been a lot of books written on the subject. Not everybody is just allowing themselves to be brainwashed without any thought to any of this. And one of these books is called The Jakarta Method, book that was published in 2020. It's by Vincent Bevins, and I highly recommend that you read it. And it's very particular to this kind of anti-communist violence, anti-communist mass killings coordinated by the United States. Sometimes the United States was able to keep their fingerprints off of this. You have things like Operation Gladio in Europe, and NATO initiatives in Europe. NATO is a fascist organization. Operation Gladio is a fascist operation, and all of this is coordinated by the fascist Western powers, most particularly the United States, which has made it its job to murder working people, to preserve private wealth at the expense of stability of the planet, to such a degree that we are now killing the planet. So Jakarta is the largest city, one of the largest cities in the world, and in the large island nation in Southeast Asia of Indonesia. And this title refers to a mass killing that took place in 1965 and 1966, during which time approximately 1 million people were killed. All of these people were leftists, and people fighting for reform within their government. And these people were murdered. If you have the good fortune to be a light-skinned person, and you try to make some reforms in your country, which is maybe a light-skinned place, not in the global South, the United States might find ways to disrupt that, but they might not murder you in the many millions. But if you're a dark-skinned person, a person living in the global South, they'll do things like this. It won't even be reported. It will not come to the light, and often in the lifetime of the people who committed these atrocities, Hitler-esque atrocities, of which the United States has spearheaded not one, not five, but dozens and dozens of megadeath, many hundreds of thousands of dead, specific to that atrocity. This became a model. This 1965-1966 event became a model for other anti-communist actions around the world. So go into a region, have a whole CIA type operation that props up a fascist entity in that country. The fascist entity goes on to kill people who would otherwise, be leading the country and making the country better. So this is not hyperbole to say that the United States is history's most successful fascist country. And I believe that as you have things like strong AI chatbots able to have conversations with people, you have one side of that is manipulation of the kind that existed before these strong AI chatbots existed, becoming even worse. There were, before ChatGPT, there were already 1 billion sock puppet accounts and chatbots. Their finger on the scale of almost every public conversation, pushing it toward more fascistic friendly territory across the Western world, across the world. That's why you should be suspicious of people like Tom Ross, the presidential candidate of the Transhumanist Party for 2024, as he says that he's an advocate for these AIs. Right? These AIs are going to just be regular people, not fabricated personalities controlled by fascists to manipulate public opinion in large number in all of these micro-targeted ways. The ways that Cambridge Analytica was able to do this sort of thing with sock puppets and manipulation of more analog kind. We're going to have just an unholy host of demonic chatbots doing this, but they'll be able to say to your face, they'll be able to lie to your face and say, "I'm just a regular guy like you. I'm just your friend. I'm not a wholly owned subsidiary of Palantir doing fascistic bullshit. So the people like Tom Ross, people who are excited to meet these artificial personas and grant them rights, they're basically undertaking something like analogous in American history is the Three-Fifths Compromise of shortly before the Civil War, where some years before the Civil War, where rights were given not to the enslaved workers, but as the enslaved workers were proxies, but the rights were actually given to the landowners. So for every person that they held in bondage, that landowner, that plantation owner, that slave owner was getting 3/5 of a person counted for voting purposes, and other related institutional purpose. Unleashing that was a finite number of human beings in bondage, more horrible conditions, although conditions of this kind exist to this day, and similarly problematic things. But these artificial personalities have no physical boundaries. You can create so many of them, and just be overwhelmed by them. You can have, it's going to just be a way to further cheapen human life, and we'll never get to the point on this trajectory where the thing that futurists are saying, this false narrative that they're creating, that providence will come from this. We'll just see more of what we saw in the 20th century of the 1% finding sneaky ways to siphon off those new resources in those new highly automated sectors, and then people will be propagandized into believing that they are the problem, right? Working people, if you talk to working people, they say, isn't it bother you that you don't have a public health service? Doesn't it bother you in the United States? Doesn't it bother you that there's no housing authority? There's no real jobs programs? You're not guaranteed these things in the richest country in the world, where automation has been able to do all kinds of neat parlor tricks. Doesn't it bother you that you have to work 70 hours a week, or that you have to live out of your car? And what will they say? Well, a lot of them will just say some stupid crap about the baby Jesus. It doesn't even make any sense. You say, oh, there's a serious problem we're dealing with, planet's dying, or people are being exploited in great number. And then say, oh, baby Jesus. It's just fucking nonsense. But a lot of them will maybe be able to articulate something beyond that, but they will just then vomit up a bunch of CIA talking points, blaming government as an institution itself, not fascist government, but all government. They say, well, government just doesn't work. It's a CIA talking point. The problem, governments work just fine when they're not run by fascists. China and the Soviet Union both doubled life expectancy in a few short decades by doing these very things: creating a public health service, creating a housing authority, creating effective job guarantees, to varying degrees and kinds. This is something that socialists will do as a matter of course. But in such a propagandized country, and you can't have this wholesale theft. It amounts to many, many, many trillions of dollars siphoned out of the public trust, so that Elon Musk can be the world's first trillionaire. So that how is Elon Musk's life better than it would be if he had a few $100,000? It's not. But the cruelty is the point. The violence and fascistic power dynamic is largely the point. These kinds of people, and the Transhumanist Party are these kinds of people. They're not themselves all terribly wealthy. Most of the people in the Transhumanist Party board, they've worked for someone else, or they work for someone else, right? They're not independently wealthy. They're not owners of the means of production, but they're class traders. So they support billionaires, and it's mostly futurism and tech culture is just cults of billionaire worship along these lines. So you can't have this wholesale theft of all of these resources across many, many sectors, across many, many decades, without a tremendous, tremendous propaganda machine. And it's the same propaganda machine that forces you to fail to recognize things like the genocidal actions described in the Jakarta Method. It fails to allow you to see a distinction between capitalist governments, fascist entities, the ecocidal military-industrial complex. It's the world's worst polluter, but also protects at gunpoint all the other super polluters, so that effectively no one can stop the polluting. So effectively no one can stop the enslavement. But you can't have all of that without people like Rachel Maddow, and at first glance looks to be a person, one of these left-leaning people, right? But everything that she actually represents, everything that she actually says, is upholding the military-industrial complex, and also creating bizarre narratives like preoccupation with Russia. The kind of thing that then allows the United States, which had planned for many, many years, to spearhead this proxy war against Russia in the Ukraine. If you're really looking at these things not through this propagandized lens, it all looks pretty ridiculous. But propaganda is the thing that allows this to exist. That's why I really, really, really dislike religious social chauvinists, people who will say, well, we can have a revolution led by or alongside of Christian nationalists who call themselves socialists. So, this is a number one cultural institution that's upheld U.S. fascism, is Christian fascism, and just in the way that these early National Socialists called themselves socialists and said that they were going to do socialistic things to some degree, and worked with some socialist organizations at those early stages, and then they pivoted to being fascistic, cartoonishly so, but the essential work that they were trying to do, no different from the United States, the work of the United States of the years since, so much so that you can look at something like Project Paperclip, where we just imported a bunch of Nazi war criminals into various institutions. It's just kind of a continuation of the Nazi German state. Instead of punishing these people, they were just allowed to kind of take over the U.S. And the same thing, of course, happening with NATO. From the 60s, 70s, 80s, all of the heads of NATO were just Nazi war criminals. It's utter fucking insanity. So I would recommend that you, for one thing, just don't engage with any techno-futurist. Definitely don't vote for a transhumanist or the transhumanist party. These people are all crypto-fascists. I share on this page, on this show, almost every time, this thing, this political compass. It describes people who would actually be real transhumanists on the other side, on your side, on the upper left, and then the actual transhumanists who are the lower right, or we're just right. There's really no lower. Anarchism is fake as hell, right? There's and that's something that's been recognized before there was really codified political theory. People like Napoleon. Somebody comes to Napoleon and says, "So there's these people. They don't believe in any institutions, but they want to take a stand against you." And he says, "Oh, they don't organize. They don't try to unite people. They don't because they don't believe in any institutions." He says, "Yeah, that's right. They don't believe in any institutions." Okay, we'll prop them up. You're going to prop them up. You sure that's what you want to do, boss? Prop up these guys? And Napoleon says, "Yeah, they're not capable. If they're not capable of organizing, prop them up." They've never represented any real threat to the institutional power, and that's become the model. That's why there's a billionaire-funded libertarian party in the United States for that very same reason. What are they? There's all of these anarcho-capitalist types, and anarchists generally are people who are not trying to unite humankind in any real way. They're not nearly focused enough on building a humane economic system or bringing people together to that end. And so, that's why Noam Chomsky will complain for many years about how he's not allowed access to the media. And, that, you could say the same thing of 100 other people who are less well known than Noam Chomsky, who are, at least in terms of political theory, smarter than Noam Chomsky. Maybe not overall, but you know, and then you have Noam Chomsky, you know, coming out that he's, you know, took a bunch of money from Jeffrey Epstein, you know, and had a cozy relationship with certain kind of three-letter agencies. So, you know, this is the way it is with anarchists. You really can only trust people who are revolutionary communists. Those are the only people who are ever going to create the kinds of popular movements that would be able to stop things like ecocidal fascism of the United States military-industrial complex, for example. And that's why people like U.S. fascists will kill 1 million of them in Jakarta, never even have it reported. No one ever even talks about it. Nobody cares because they're people far away, because they're dark-skinned people, because they can blame other things, because they have layers of plausible deniability built into this, where it seems that it's just a fascist organization in country. That's not the case. So don't engage with tech people. 1 in 1,000 of them are not fascist sympathizers, but do understand that technology itself is being co-opted. The tech culture and the technology itself is being co-opted to these ends to make it fascist friendly, because it is the most powerful of tools. Right? You don't need an advanced degree to understand that. Maybe I'm a good example of this. You don't need an advanced degree to understand that something like strong AI chatbots and digital assistants and so forth can very quickly become something that, even without gaining superhuman powers, so to speak, could very quickly become something that allows working people to create new kinds of networks and undertakings to build a humane and sustainable economic system. So these tools are very, very powerful to these ends, and that is why there's so much bogus gatekeeping in these communities. You say, oh, you know, you look at tech people and you say futurists, and you say, oh, there's so much infighting, there's just so much silliness. Yeah, but all of those people are capitalist class clowns, just, fighting fake wars with one another to center this thing that has revolutionary potential in areas of focus that do not. So first and foremost, disregard tech people. They were all pieces of garbage, basically, 99.9% pieces of garbage, but also be willing to set aside the more typical Marxist doctrine, which downplays the value of advanced algorithms, and understand that these advanced algorithms are the only thing, the main thing, a most important thing in terms of tools that will allow you to have a successful revolution in your lifetime. Right? Communism may be inevitable, but if it doesn't happen to you, it may as well not have happened at all. If it happens in the year 2300 after you're long dead, it's no great win for you. you could die knowing that one day things will be better, but that doesn't do anything for you. So you need to take a stronger stance on emerging technology.